So for the benefit of the recording, welcome to the meeting of the Community Services Committee, Wednesday, 18th January. The agenda has been circulated. Any apologies for absence?
Chair, there's one apology. Councillor Cowley and Councillor Drake is here to substitute. It's normal practice for me to ask the chair to take a vote on whether to accept the apologies.
The reason given by Councillor Cowley?
To be honest, I don't know.
Family commitments. Family commitments. Okay, well, that's not what I was told, but for whichever reason sounds good. Take you. Okay, all in favour? Thank you. Includes approving Councillor Drake. The declaration of interest for business with front of the meeting. No. Any report from the chairman? No. Any urgent items?
No urgent items, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any public questions?
None received.
The minutes of the last meeting, which have been circulated. Any questions on the minutes of the page number 1 at the bottom? Right. Which side? Yep. Yep. Minutes of other meetings referred to the Community Services Committee. First, it's the allotments working party. At full council, we have the chair present. We don't do that at committee meetings, do we? Or do we? I don't think we need to. That's fine. Okay. Right. So the allotments committee working party. Sorry, page 6. Any questions? All we're doing is receiving them. We're not resolution. No questions. I'll pass over to page 9, which is the meeting of the Christmas Carnival Working Party. Any questions? Page 13, the same working party later meeting. Page 17, Memorial Day Working Party, December. So no questions. So all of those. Thank you. Officers' reports, which begin on page 19. Resolution tracker. Do you want to speak to that at all, Mark?
Just briefly, Chair, if that's okay. Just obviously this report presents the forward planner and the resolution tracker. I would just comment, although it doesn't say it in there, that there's likely to be one more addition at least on the agenda for this meeting in March, because it doesn't currently show the request for approval of the Tree Works contractor in relation to the Tree Works tender specification that you'll be looking at tonight. So that should be on the March agenda.
Okay.
You're asked to note and approve the forward planner, please, and to note the resolution tracker and approve the removal of the resolutions that have been marked as complete.
Yep. Okay. Any questions, anyone? Yes.
The only thing was a query really on the appendix B, the resolution tracker. It obviously mentions the public realm improvements and the public realm projects to be considered in future meetings. I'm specifically wondering about the sensory garden and fountain area, because I think we saw some mock-ups for that, but it feels like it was a very long time ago, and I just wondered where that was at and when that was coming back.
If it's okay, yeah, I'd like to take that question away to the project manager and the town clerk and to come back to you. So it was sensory garden and fountain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was those that we had mock-ups of, wasn't it?
Thank you.
That's satisfactory. Any other questions? Are we happy to vote and approve it at stage in 2-1? Thank you very much. Budget control, page 25.
So, Chair, did you want to say 2.1.2 as well? Or 2.1.1, but did you want to take them together?
I just said 2.1, which I think is both of them. Yeah, that's what I thought I said. Not
You
sure
think you
that's-
said 2.1?
Yeah, okay,
Gotcha.
hopefully basic. Okay. Page 25. Which is budget report for. Well, it's budget control, it's not next year's budget, it's budget control for the current year. The question noting says, it's reserves, the variances for the budget. Any questions, anyone? Is there a special subject, anything else?
Yeah, I had my full say on the full out to the CPF last week.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I wasn't going to repeat it.
No, not all of it there, because it didn't seem that this committee should. No,
I don't
come out of
believe
Thank you.
there's anything there at all.
It sounds like people don't need my input, Chair, but I was just going to say that this reflects the position as at the end of November. And if you look at Appendix A, it shows a favourable variance of 21,749 at the end of November. And there's just two or three key things that contribute to that. One of them is the commercial income, which is favourable as a result of the Harpenden Golf Club licence, because the HTC income is linked to the membership, and the membership there has increased over the last couple of years. Under general income, the £3,040 was a recharge to the golf club for their portion of a section of the horse ride maintenance that we carried out. And I think that the only other notable favourable variance it relates to other expenses, which will relate to the fact that we haven't received utilities bills from the storage depot, and there's also currently underspend within the vehicle maintenance costs and the farmers markets expenses. Those were the key things I was going to mention, Chair.
Fine, that's all right, I wasn't meaning to exclude you at all. Do by all means interrupt. Any questions? So, yes, yes. So we have just, thank you. Planning Commission and Maintenance, page 30. Right, Clark, you have the first go this time.
Thank you, Chair. So this report outlines that officers from the Town Council have assessed a number of Harpenden Town Council's paths. Having done so, you'll see that the recommendation to committee requests approval for works to Lydekker Park and Porters Hill Park surfaces using the capital budget with release of up to £15,000 to do so. Taking this approach and prioritising leaves some budget should significant requirements appear in the future. So, for example, if in the appendix with the photographs, on the last page of that, there are some pictures of Church Green, and the more recent photograph, which is the one with the damp list shown on it, you can see that it was on that page, Jeff. The one with
Page
the,
39, yeah.
yes, with the potholes in it that have appeared since the original pictures were taken. And that just illustrates how quickly paths can deteriorate if you get a bit of snow and ice. So rather than spend all the money now on the paths that could perhaps do with some maintenance, although it's not a health and safety issue, it's best to keep some in the bank should these other items that are these other paths deteriorate further in the future. The other thing I think is worth noting is that the pictures that you see within that appendices of Parva Close show that there's quite a lot of encroachment of vegetation at the edge. And we will be clearing that to investigate what the edges of the path looks like. So it's not the end of the works. Path maintenance will be an ongoing activity.
Thank you very much. Can I suggest that not formal, we're not on the resolution, that obviously keep an eye, particularly on Birch. Okay, fine, you'll go first.
Sorry, just one other thing on the path question. So, I know Phil knows I mentioned it a little while ago. The path behind the new pillar box in Piggott's Hill Lane, across the grass there, we agreed that it needed some attention. It's just a muddy, because everybody shortcuts because of the repositioning of the new post box.
Yes,
So
Chair.
just walk across the.
That's a good point, yes.
So-
Yeah,
So, Chair, what I can tell the committee about that is that back in last summer, we were going to deal with reseeding of the grass there because it's a green with a desire
Yes.
line and it's a muddy desire line. So we were going to either turf it or reseed it. But we met a complication in that there is an exposed armoured cable sticking out of the ground there. It's a British Telecommunications cable. They have proved incredibly difficult to communicate with. I rang them in June and said the reasons why it needed sorted out. Not only is it a trip hazard on that informal path, but also we can't do the maintenance until they expertly bury it again. I rang back a few days later to ask what the progress was. And I had to, in all of this is quite a short story because there's quite a few numbers that you end up trying to ring to get somebody to speak to who can help. I rang back to find out what the progress was, and the best they could tell me was it had been safeguarded. So I then said, well, that's not really good enough, because I knew what they'd done. They put a flimsy little barrier around it, which kept getting kicked over and kicked up the road and things. But they then said that I needed to ring another number, which they gave me, which was the number that I'd just rung a few minutes before and been told to ring that one. So by searching on the internet, I found an address in Sheffield that seemed to be a complaints department. So I wrote a letter to them in August and didn't get a response. So I think it was last week, I did manage to find, I hadn't found this previously, I did find that there's a contact form for complaints for British Telecommunications, and I submitted another formal complaint outlining what the problem was and asking them to resolve it. But I need them to resolve that cable issue before I can do something about
Apologies. Sorry, Chair.
so I'm glad you asked. It's far more interesting than what I was going to raise.
If you do get round to the point of reseeding that path, are you then going to put a small chain link fence like we have in other parts of the town? Because otherwise, if you don't, I think people just continue to walk across it and therefore undermine your work on that.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'll make a note of that, Chair.
Because I think they'll just continue to walk across it.
Great.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine.
No, sorry. Anyone? That's fine, that's fine. Any other points? Councillor Swindon?
And a couple of things which are sort of related to paths, but not to this exactly. There's another path, informal path, on that corner between Queen's Road and Walker's Road. Are those pedestrian traffic lights? And I don't know if there's any intention to do something with that, but this informal path is slightly and probably unsafe as well. It doesn't look quite broken up.
Where is it? I know the roads, I know the traffic lights, but
If you're coming out of Queen's, turning left towards Southdown, it's that corner on your left-hand side.
Oh, right.
As you turn onto the main.
there isn't a footpath there, is there, all the way?
It goes round the corner.
Round, isn't there?
Yeah, you kind of, but it just goes straight across.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'd have to sort of loop round
Yeah.
to the footpath, which goes down Queen's Road.
So you basically cut a triangle, don't you?
Yeah.
So, Yeah, I don't know if it's worth looking at. It's not a particularly long path, but anyway, something to
That
raise.
is outlined, does it?
Chair, I was just going to say, I need to check that. You're talking about on the opposite side of the road from the common.
Yeah, so probably not ours.
It might not be ours. I don't think that it will be, but I will check that and will let you know.
And the other thing was just whether the paths in Rothamsted had been assessed as well. The one from the lime tree over towards the skate park, I don't think it's been particularly good condition.
So the answer to that is yes, the Rothamsted parks were all assessed at the same time as this. The two green spaces development officers assessed all the parts of all the green spaces. And that, from what they observed, it wasn't assessed as one of the priorities. But as I mentioned earlier, this isn't the end of a piece of work. It's ongoing really, and it might be that things change quite quickly and it might need some work. In addition to this that's covered in the report, in what the committee have been requested to approve, we've also for less expensive pieces of work, such as at the fountain, where some paving slabs need levelling, we've asked a local contractor to do that, and that will be done out of the normal annual budget rather than from any capital or reserves. Also, that picture that I referred the committee to earlier about the potholes that developed on Church Green, one of the town rangers bashed some tarmac into those holes. We just have to keep an eye on them and see whether it deteriorates again. But if it does, then we'll have to take action there.
Sorry, just a question on the numbers on paragraph 4. Does that mean that remaining capital budget of 46.8, is that after we've released the funds?
Chair, that figure there is the figure before I've asked for the release of up to £18,000 for these works.
Yeah, and I mean, that's probably asking the obvious. If we have anything less, well, because the quote is below that, if you've got left, does it go back?
So I asked the committee to approve up to £18,000
Oh,
in case if there's any reason during the works why the cost increases. I'm hoping it won't, but it just means that I don't have to come back to the committee to ask for another £1,000 if something does happen. But what that does mean is if I've asked for you to approve £18,000, if the works only cost £14,000, that other £4,000 remains where it is.
No, I'll read that right now, thank you, sorry.
I did raise that, Councillor Brigham, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it also means that because we're releasing 18 out of 46,
Releasing
there's
up
20.
to 18. Up to 18. That's the bit I didn't read either.
Yes,
So we're not releasing full 18.
up to 18 according to whatever's needed.
Yes, Chair. So
Okay.
if it's less, we won't take the 18 out. We'll take what's needed.
That's fine.
Up to that.
Okay, but we're only authorising up to 18.
Yes.
Therefore, out of the 46, there's a 28 remaining in the capital budget for path repairs, which we're not transferring out.
That's correct, Chair.
Right, okay. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Right, yes, okay. Fine. What I was going to say, which I think you've covered already, Bill, is given the devastation of the ice and snow, which is throughout the town, and we might have repetition, so the time to take a look is in a few weeks' time when the depth limit is ended. Officers do need to keep an eye, especially on something like this in the town centre, but I think from what you've said, they would anyway.
Yes, Chair. So the Green Spaces Development Officers don't have a specific inspection role, but they keep an eye on that sort of thing. However, there is a formal inspection regime, which was previously approved by this committee, which does involve inspection for town greens. So any matters like that get inspected. I think that's a monthly inspection. So they would report that to me.
We haven't actually discussed 3.5, which is the contractors, but that's only here, isn't it? And we're doing the first two sites, Lydica and Portland Hill. And in the cheapest contract, Lydica, and the only contract in Portland Hill, so that's pretty straightforward.
Yes, Chair, we did, another quote did eventually come in, but it was too late to be included in the committee papers, so that's the quote that we've got for Borders Hill.
Was it less than this? or-
Yeah, no, it wasn't. I don't, I'm quite certain that it wasn't, because otherwise I would have wanted to revisit it.
Has there more questions? We can proceed with the resolution if you want. Which is the repairs, two sites, the release of up to 18,000 and the positive contractors. In favour? Thank you very much. Right, the tree works tender, on page 40, so it's a major contract. I'll ask Phil to speak to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So following on from this committee approving that we should get all of the trees surveyed last summer. They've surveyed approximately 31,000 trees on our lands. Having considered the survey results extensively and in detail, mainly the Green Spaces development officers, and they've gone out and looked at the trees as well. This tree works tender specification has been developed and put together for this committee to consider. It contains what have been assessed to be the most pressing 200 work items, which appertain to 190 trees across a number of our sites. And what we're asking is for this committee to approve the tender specification, and then following the tender process that will happen if the committee does approve the tender specification, we will come back to this committee on the 15th of March, asking you to consider approving the preferred contractor that's come out of that process.
Okay.
In paragraph 13, it says award criteria and you've got price and time frame. Looking at the form of tender, the only reference I saw was to time frame was we are able and willing to complete the whole of the works on or before October 2023, and then goes on to say anticipate the works will take X weeks to complete. Is that what you're referring to in the time frame? And if so, how are you actually scoring it? Is it a case of, yes, they can deliver it by that date and that's a tick in the box and they get 20%? Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, Chair. So I think that in the timescales somewhere it says that the works would, let me just make sure I'm saying this right. So in the timetable on page 45, over into page 46, it says commencement of works from the 23rd of March this year. And then there's the completion date that you refer to, which is right towards the end of the document, which is it has to be completed before October. The reason we want it completed before October is clearly this is risk-based work and we don't want it dragging on too long. So I think I'm hoping I'm answering your question when I'm saying that the timescales are they need to be able to start in late March and they need to be completed before the beginning of October.
So in terms of because the awards criteria, that's how you actually mark their tender, isn't it? So 80% of it is towards cost.
Yes.
And 20% towards time frame. Is it purely that they can commit to doing it within that window of time? And if they can, then they get the full marks, as it were, for time frame.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just explore this? Because it seems a bit odd. So anyone who says, yeah, obviously confirm that, do it by October. And then it says that take 20 weeks. So from the end of March to October, that's about 26 weeks. So everyone who says effectively 26 weeks gets the full 20%. Councillor Scriven was assuming. But if someone said, "Oh, we'll do it in 12 weeks," do you give them the 20 and the other guy who's going to take 26 weeks only gets 10, or does everyone get 20? Because it seems a bit odd, because you're not, and the way this is written, you're not going to give the work to anyone who can't complete it by the end of October. So everyone's going to get 20%. Because it's crime to tender.
I think that you're right, Chair. I think that what you're saying is exactly right. The only thing that will be, obviously, when it comes to scoring the tender submissions that have come in, then a more detailed criteria is put in. And I don't know whether it's envisaged whether that will have different bands of criteria. If somebody's going to take 6 months, do they score less of the 20% than somebody says that they're going to do it in April and May, for example? So that's the only way that I can see that there will be a variation in whether or not people will get 20% will be what the criteria for the actual assessment of the tender submissions says.
So they aren't actually given details of the scoring anyway, so they won't know that they're being marked on. This is our report, isn't it? Yes, but they wouldn't actually see that.
But that's very obvious.
Yes, so this is in the public arena, as will this discussion be that we are having now. I would not attempt to argue against what the chair has proposed as being correct, that there's potential that it might be a straightforward 20% of the marks if you can actually do it. But I can't say that that's exactly true until I've seen what criteria gets developed for the scoring of the tender submissions, which will be based within whatever that criteria is around the time frame to score the 20%.
Thing to bear in mind is this will be in the public domain. At District, there is a remarkable number of judicial reviews called for by people who are unsuccessful tenderers. So you've got to make sure your stuff is absolutely clear, and when you do make an award, that can't be challenged. It's quite surprising how many people. I mean, of course, in many cases, all they're trying to do is get information. How far off were we? This kind of thing. But it does take up an awful lot of time. It's the time doing that stuff.
Okay, no, thank you for contributions. I don't think we're quite finished with this point, because in a bigger and more important tender, the award criteria will go on the page and pages. That's not realistic. It seems to want to leave a lot to discretion. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying that's how it is. I'm wondering whether we need to say something in 13. This is drafting, or just to the effect that the client reserves the right to refine and develop criteria for the award of this contract, but just something like that which shows it isn't all here. That's right. You probably have more experience than other people.
Yes, I was just thinking on the time frame. Your point about, if you don't make the time frame, it's 0.
Yeah,
you're out.
Yeah.
If you're in, if you say you can do it in time, you get 20% automatically. Would you put other criteria in there other than price?
So when you say, I totally misunderstood this, if someone says I can do it by May.
But it's okay. Let me just deal with Councillor Rose's point. I think it's slightly different.
Oh, is that?
Come to it. Because Councillor Rose is suggesting, should there other criteria, for example, reputation, references?
Yeah, or have we worked with these people before? Do we consider them reliable?
Because in practice, all those things will be taken into account.
Yes.
Yeah, so should we say it? That's the point.
So Chair, when this was being considered, originally, there was also a percentage score in there for health and safety. But then that was then considered, well, that's quite hard to score. So that was then replaced by the statement that's been put there instead. So prior to assessment, tenders will be screened to ensure they have provided the appropriate health and safety documentation. I think that's perhaps something that has been used in previous tenders is along the line to tenderers being able to evidence that they have delivered this sort of works successfully before that.
Okay, I'm not sure we've quite got to the bottom of it, but councillor Brigham, your point?
Well, it's just, I'm not sure I understand the time frame point. I know there's a dead end at October, but one person might say I can do it in April and another person might say I can do it in September. If you weigh it, then that one has 20%. I still think it's valid.
So, Chair, I think that comes back to the point of what the criteria that gets developed to be used by the assessors of the tender submissions, whether there is something in there that then weights. Do we consider? I'm speaking hypothetically at the minute because I've not worked on that, and it might not be me who does work on it. But just listening to what the points Councillor Friggin is saying there. Hypothetically speaking, it is possible that there could be a different weighting if we are considering this as risk-based work. If somebody says they can do it in April and May, that might score them a higher score on the timescale criteria than if we've got to wait until September for them to actually do it. But I said I'm speaking hypothetically because that criteria for the assessments has not yet been developed.
That's true.
Should what they're being assessed on not be completely obvious in the tender? So that they, you know, for example, if they're trying to spread their workload over the summer months or whatever, or if they bring in 2 teams, they can get the work done in a shorter period of time. If that's going to score them higher points, that might be how they choose to tender for the for this job. So, for example, they might say we can do it over 16 weeks and they'll just put 2 guys on it. But if it's going to lose them the tender, they might say, okay, we'll do it in a month. So it kind of feels like they should know what the criteria are. And if we're not sure, they're not going to be sure. So I
agree. If we don't know what we mean, then
yeah, so I kind of feel like that needs to be worked out before the tender goes out, but I don't know.
Yeah, so I think, Chair, that perhaps the simplest way to do this is to say that it is that point that anybody who can do it within the timescales is going to get the 20%.
well, that doesn't make sense because you're not point in having it actually as a precondition like health and safety.
Yeah, because then everything's decided on price, isn't it?
Yeah.
So does the committee wish to remove the timeframe
Well,
and add a different one such as experience in delivering these types of projects?
Well, but naturally, I mean, you and your team being involved in developing this, so what we're really trying to suss out is what priority you give to the time it's going to take to do the job. As Councillor Sturgeon said, if a guy's going to do it in 3 months, says he's going to do it in 3 months, are you going to prefer him over someone who otherwise is just the same price if you're going to take 6 months? You probably would, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
Having said this is time critical.
yeah,
If it's the same price, same reputation,
yeah, I think you're right, Chair.
well, if that's what we mean, then that's what we should say.
To clarify.
Okay.
Waiting to give them to the contractor who can get the work done to the standard within the short period of time or somewhere.
The problem with that is it turns on one line on page 50, which is I will anticipate the work will take. This is very loose. It's not even a commitment. So anyone who realizes that time is of the essence, you don't just say, oh, I'll do it by next weekend. I mean, you know. So it's quite a difficult one to you're probably then down to, if you've worked with these people before and they deliver on what they say, then go with it. Fine, okay, so I think all we need to do is page 46, that's my suggestion, price of 8%. Then after that, put preference being given to indicated early completion of the work.
Specify that work needs to be done, we would be considering that the work could be done by X date. And also the length, the duration of the works or something like that, so that you're not explicitly saying whoever does it in the shortest time will get the contract.
Well, that's a factor, it's not the only factor.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to overcomplicate it too much. So my wording was deliberately indicative of what we want without being too prescriptive.
I wouldn't be too prescriptive at all.
Yeah,
Dangerous.
that's all. And then let's just continue. I mean, if someone has like questions again, then we can deal with it. But going to Councillor Ellis's excellent point, there are other factors, reputation, references, previous successful completion. But I have a third bullet, which is reputation. Oh, do we get references from that one?
We don't normally get references.
Let's say that then. Reputation and previous successful work for the client. So instead of it being 80-20, whatever, we've got to decide what we make it. So this is a difficult one because price is important, but frankly, if someone comes in cheap, but they've done a bad job for us in the past, then we really don't want
A
them.
box job, forget it.
Yes. Therefore, if we went arbitrarily, say for this third one as being 20, it doesn't give us that flexibility. If actually they've come in too low. Why don't, instead of going to percentage, why don't we say, with this is avoiding being prescriptive of percentage, saying weight will be given to reputation and previous successful work for the client, without limiting to what the percentages.
I think, well, I get the point about reputation, but I think is it a bit too hard to define? It's like a bit sort of like you can't really say one. It's subjective, I think, potentially, and I think I would broaden out work for the client for evidence of previous work being done. So if they've said, well, we've done this in X council nearby, then I'd say that's fine.
Do we do that? Do we ask for, well, it's effectively references. We don't take, do we ask for evidence that they've worked successfully on other?
With some other projects, such as, for example, the completion of the boardwalk,
Yeah.
then we wanted them to provide us with evidence of similar projects that they'd completed to a good standard.
They park us on there, but we're not doing it here.
I don't know whether it's more difficult with tree works or not. It might not be. I mean, with the boardwalk, they were able to.
Yeah, no,
send in.
with this one, we haven't suggested we're doing that. So I'm a little reluctant to do that. I'm just wanting a bit of flexibility. And the chances are we probably know all the contractors who are going to propose this anyway, don't we?
Quite likely, yes.
Therefore, successful work probably
Yes,
gets
the
us there.
successful previous work.
But not necessarily.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Otherwise, you've closed. Yeah.
If the door is potentially
Yeah.
contractors, because I wouldn't limit it to this council.
No.
No, what I'm saying is weight will be given to. It's not saying it's a precondition. my suggestion would be, as a third bullet, but without a percentage, so leave those to 18 jobs as they are, weight will also be given to previous successful work for the client.
Is that not disadvantage anyone who hasn't previously worked?
Yeah,
for
it's
us?
done.
This going to run foul of any anti-competitive.
Yeah, it
Goals
is.
for tendering in the public sector.
Where we're given for previous successful work, full
Full
stop.
stop,
Yeah.
that,
That's right.
yeah, I think otherwise you start running the risk of anti-competitive.
We'll never employ anyone who's not employed before.
Yeah, you start to, yeah, particularly dangerous for public sector to put that kind of limitation on.
When we've approved tenders before, I mean, Carl has occasionally said, you know, reduce and refine, and he's kind of said in passing, right?
Yeah.
We can't wait to just do it.
Yeah, but this is responding to the point that we should put in anything that is actually a reason for us saying no, because at the moment it's all price and time frame. Okay, so I think we've got after time frame preference being given for indicated early completion of the works. And as a third bullet, without a percentage, we've got weight will be given for previous successful work.
Yes, Chair, I've got that, thank you, and they're both weighted.
Okay. I think we possibly need to look as far as the same point of page 50. In the middle of the page, it says, I will anticipate the works will take complete. Is anticipate strongly enough? I know we can't make a contractual commitment, but it's a bit, isn't it?
Estimate.
I would say something like, having scoped the work, I expect the work will take.
Can I just throw something slightly, but what about birds nesting? Aren't we?
Okay, can we just stop the wording first and then we'll come back? I'll come back to your
That
first
will
listing.
affect the timetable.
Yeah, I know. Well,
Okay.
okay. Any thoughts on that?
I think we can assume the scope of it. So you say, having scoped the work, we anticipate.
Well, I don't say I expect, I don't like anticipate.
I wonder with this, if they're basically saying it needs to be finished by October. Is the assumption then that that's going to be the completion date for everybody? And then they're just trying to get an idea of how many weeks to work back from that as to when the start date might be?
No, because they, well,
It's on it before October, so it could be September or August.
Or before.
It is effectively, it's going to be X weeks from the date they start, isn't it?
well, you're right, it starts from, I was reading it starts on, but it's from. And either we go and make this more complicated or we step back and make it simpler. If we make it more complicated, I think we'd have to say, I expect to commence the work on whatever, and it will take X weeks. Because if they can do it in 2 months, there's no point in them waiting until August to start it, because that defeats the object.
Yeah.
And if we're relaxed as to when it's done before October, then we can actually step back from this and do what someone else suggested, and take out the time frame 20%. I'm not quite sure what we want. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think we're not sure how the time frame would work.
Yeah.
You know, so for example, you know, as you were saying, somebody can do it by May, does that mean they get 10% or something, or 20%? Because at the moment, the time frame, the way it's explained, is binary. You know, either you get it done by this date, or say you can do it by this date, and you get 20%, or you can't do it by that date, in which case you're discarded.
And it might go to price, because if someone works out, then again, it's contract, if they get to do it in starting in April, finishing in June, that might be one price. But if it's clear they've got until October, that might be a lower price. So if we make this too tight, we're actually upping the price, because they all have lots of contracts they're juggling with.
Yeah.
Right, if you don't timescale and they'll pour in overtime and God knows what into it, then by definition, that will put up the price.
Is that what we want? I thought not.
We obviously want the chair, we want the best value for money that we can get on this.
And we've taken a judgment, a risk view that if it's done by presumably 1st October, it's fine. Then I think we simplify it, we take out time frame.
Well, I was just going to ask, why are we asking how many weeks the work is going to take? Is that for the purposes of
Yeah, exactly. Well,
making
it's
that
not-
20% evaluation?
Yeah.
Or is it relevant to the council for some reason? Do they not want people on site for too long? Is it?
Well, you wouldn't want it open-ended.
Well, it can't be because it's got to finish by October.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so
absolutely
we're
right.
estimating, okay, the way we've put it, but you've got to have something like October.
No, that's not in dispute. What's in dispute is number of weeks to do the work.
Doesn't
Do we care whether it's April?
Providing it's like done by time, do we care?
That's what I don't know.
And there's so many sites across town, it doesn't matter when they come and go. Doesn't?
You're correct, Chair. It doesn't matter, but it is sometimes useful to know whether or not they are going to come and work for the town council for 6 weeks solid, or whether they're going to come for a day here and there and spread it out over a number of months. So it's a useful piece of information.
And is that relevant to who we award the contract to?
Probably not, no.
Yes, maybe it also gives some ideas to their day rate or whatever. If they're suggesting it's going to take them 2 weeks and they're charging £5,000, 4 weeks and charging 8. Maybe gives us some steer there.
I think the line, just a bit expect it'll take X weeks, is reasonably harmless on its own. What is still unclear is the timeframe 20%.
Yes, how that operates.
Unless we know what we want to do, we can't really settle the tender. Because October is an absolute.
Yes, I think it's not very helpful to Chair, but the best I can say is that when tenders have gone out before and they've said what the percentage weighting is, then when the tender has gone out, the specific details of the criteria that's then used by the assessment panel has not been published with the tender in advance before. So the criteria has been applied equally and fairly across any tender submissions that the council have received, but it necessarily the detail of it has not necessarily been disclosed any more than in the general.
I can see that because you're filling in the gaps.
Yeah.
This is stating it here. It's 20% on time frame. There's not a gap here. It's clear.
It can be simplified this by just simply saying, because I think the intention is time frame. It's kind of quick, so you can complete it by May rather than complete it by the end of October, then by this the right standards, the rest of it, then that's obviously preferable. But the price go through the roof, and that's part of the criteria as well. So, surely this 20% is that you get some of the 20% of the award criteria depending upon when you say you're completing it by. That's the only way it makes any sense, because otherwise you can't have this binary thing whereby you either get 20% or you don't. I mean, that makes no sense at all, because as you said, anybody who doesn't meet the October thing doesn't get considered. So that makes that 20% statement irrelevant. So it's just a matter, it seems to me, of if maybe just defining what's the it is now. It always says award criteria, it says time frame 20%. It doesn't define here that means that if you meet a time, it's what time frame you're actually putting into the tender. It seems to me that was my original interpretation till I heard this particular discussion.
As a number of weeks.
That well, I was sort of relaxed because I assumed, well, if you're going to say you're going to do it in 15 weeks and someone else says they're going to do it in 26, then presumably they are more likely to get the award or get better marks for the award in that case. It doesn't mean they'll still necessarily get the award because their price for doing that might be astronomical, in which case they'll get less of the 80% for doing that. No, in which case, I actually think what's there probably works. I think it's just that maybe we've got ourselves a bit tied up here with what the definition of time frame is. We could clarify that by putting a sentence in that the time frame relates to the time anticipated to complete the work, or something.
Or alternatively, we could approve this recommendation 2.1, subject to clarification of how the
Yes.
criteria would work.
Yes.
So we're not going to resolve this tonight.
Well, I'd be happy with that. Sometimes I've had options push back on that sort of delegation, but I don't know.
You said yes, well, to committee members and then.
Are you happy? with
Yeah,
this?
so the wording was subject to,
Clarification.
Yep.
How the time frame in the award criteria would operate.
I'll be happy to answer that as it comes out. Okay, fine with that, in which case
thank you, Chair.
we don't make the alteration that reference being given to those agreements. I think we should have the sentence that weight will also be given previous successful work.
Yes. So I have those two.
Okay. On page 50, where it says, I anticipate the works will take, I really would prefer the word expect, because anticipate has slightly different meaning. Well, if you're.
Oh, no, I understand exactly. I understand.
And hit the accelerator before it changes green, that's anticipating.
It's my Yorkshire, if it's a spade, it's a spade, you know.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Okay, so don't know if we get our 20% for finishing this discussion before the end of October, but I think that was a serious doubt. I do have some more comments, which I think we can deal with more quickly, but there's the pressing issue of Councillor Nicholas' birds.
Chair, if I may have an answer to that for you. Our green spaces, both our green spaces development officers are very environmentally and ecologically minded. And this is something that they have raised for discussion during the course of producing this tender specification. Because of course, summer is bird nesting season. Now, the most sensitive parts of bird nesting is generally hedgerows, and very little, if any, of this is hedgerows. The second point, which from discussion with the green spaces development officers, is that tree surgeons know when, because they do work throughout the whole year, and if they're going to do work on a tree, during bird nesting season, they will always check the tree first to make sure that there isn't any nesting there. And if there is any nesting, they won't work in there, and they would raise it with the green spaces development officers.
Yes, in which case they do need some leeway. The project might go a bit beyond somebody because they've.
I don't think it matters, because this is an expectation how long it will take. It doesn't, it's not a commitment, and it's not.
Yeah.
They don't press on regardless if
Yes.
they're true, you know, for some reason stop.
But we don't narrow it down so much that it's really.
Okay.
And so, Chair, just to clarify on that, that the green spaces development officers would not allow work to go ahead even in our expected timeframe unless it had real health and safety concerns to human life. They would not let something go ahead if it was going to interfere with wildlife.
Chair, can I just ask? It's not that all the trees marked as blue in here are coming down, is it? Or is it, so if like they can do some like remedial work they'll do that?
So, Chair, in the survey, it will stipulate, it will specify what the piece of work is.
Yeah.
Some of them are felling works,
Yeah.
but not all of them. Some of them would be things like removing of deadwood.
Yeah.
For example.
Can I just follow on from that point, which is actually something I was going to say in terms of presenting these to us in future. I don't know if there's a way of that's highlighting the trees that are requiring remedial work, which, you know, amongst all the green is more difficult, but also then to perhaps have something that indicates the trees are being felled, because to go through this list and find sort of on the map and on the list which are actually being felled is quite difficult to do. And obviously felling has a massive impact, whereas, you know, if they're lifting a canopy, it's insignificant really. So I don't know if there's some way of highlighting the ones to be felled on these maps.
Yeah, there's some sense, but of course, this primarily has to work for the purpose of the tender and the contract. What we can't ask ourselves to do is a whole different lot of work for our benefit. Though if we can produce things which are actually readable, it would help.
Just too old, Roger.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's just me. I mean,
No, it's not quite.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that probably was crying out for A3 rather than A4.
Yes, I'm not going to try and pretend
No.
to understand the technicalities and try to merge things, but
No,
I think
it's a question of a bigger sheet of paper, because I think yeah, it still wouldn't have been obvious. Maybe just something to bear in mind that people struggle with understanding exactly what the work is.
Yeah.
We accept it's been checked and it needs to be done and all of that, but just getting our mind around exactly how what's being done. People don't struggle, but just bear in mind very much that.
Yes, Chair. And Chair, those maps are produced by the system that all the surveys are entered into.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it would be quite, it would be, of course, if the committee wants it done, it can be done, but it would be quite a lot of work to do stuff that's not automatically available in the system.
Right, okay. I do have budget questions. If no one else has them. Looking at 3.2, the survey in the summer of 2022, could you remind me how often we do this survey?
So our tree surveys, Chair, are done in accordance with the current Harpenden Town Council tree policy.
Yes.
Now, something that is on the agenda for the March Community Services Committee is a review of the Harpenden Town Council tree policy.
Okay.
And that is, it's a really complex, detailed bit of work that's going on at the minute. And it is linked to these surveys that we've received as a result of the survey that was done last summer.
Fine.
Because it turns out that we now have the clearest picture that Harpenden Town Council has probably ever had on its trees,
Yes.
including we have a lot more trees than had previously been indicated by surveyors. And there is also more recent legal cases where occurrences have happened involving trees. And we have got to amend our tree policy so that it is practical, affordable and workable to survey them when they need to be surveyed, but also to survey them in relation to the recent stated cases as well.
I'm happy to wait for that documentation and that discussion. That's useful. Thank you very much. Okay. On the same 3.2, we're 31,000 trees, which is phenomenal. Thank you. And there are 386 recommendations. I presume that means recommendation concerning 386 trees, but we're only doing work on 190 of them now. And judgments actually made, and that's fine. And that 190 are the ones which are considered from a safety point of view require the work most urgently. Who has made that assessment and how did they arrive at it being six briefly.
Yeah, so the tree surveyors themselves have risk criteria.
Right.
So they assess the trees in relation to that. And I think that we would find that nearly all the trees that are within, that all the works that are within this tender specification are ones that they've considered to be in the top risk that we have. In addition, our officers, Green Spaces Development officers, have also gone out and looked at these trees that have been highlighted as the most risk as well, to survey them themselves. There are, I think, as you've alluded to, there are things not included within this tender specification. They're not considered to be a risk. Some of them are works that we might also do internally. We have several chainsaw competent people. We can't fell trees, but we can do certain tree works. But in addition, there was other types of recommendations. So, for example, we have, I think it's 3 trees which we have just before Christmas, following the recommendations from the tree survey, had works done in relation to metal supports on their branches, 2 in the town centre and 1 on the common. So we're confident that the works that need doing in connection, in relation to being the most riskiest, are the ones that are within this tender specification.
But clearly there's some risk, a bit lower to the other 190, because it's about half and half. So how do we continue to monitor those, or do we wait for the next meeting's discussion on that?
So if they're not in this current works tender, it means that there is no urgency within the time frame for these works for works to be carried out.
No.
Now, when as part of all the ongoing considerations that happen around the new tree policy, which will come to committee in March, a big part of this is assessing what the intervals are should be for our surveys going forward, but also how we define our zones. Now we know that we've got so many trees, like what we thought we had.
Okay, fine. Okay, I'm happy. That's great.
I mean, there's one question here. I mean, obviously we talked about 386 risk-based recommendations for 190 trees, but I presume it's possible that there might be more than one recommendation relating to a single tree.
So, Chair,
That close the gap.
not completely, but in this tender works, I think that there are 200 items of work required, and that covers 190 trees.
Right.
So there is duplication.
Yeah,
of
that's what
work
I
within the same thing.
wondered, because I thought there might be more than one issue on a particular tree.
Yes, that is correct, Chair.
Right.
Possibly, we haven't alluded to this, that possibly explains the 190 against the 200, which is on page 44. Second paragraph. But anyway, I think we're probably getting into a bit more detail than we need
Yeah,
to.
I'm just trying to point out that might be a reason why there's a difference.
Okay, very good.
Since you mentioned metal supports on trees, I noticed that there's one of the big trees outside Pete's Express. It's got like a metal support, and I've noticed still like quite big branches are like been on the footpath around there. You go from say Pete's Express across to the Inn on the Green, and then people just sort of push the branches to the side so you clear the footpath. And I just wonder whether these metal supports are a good idea, or whether it's just easier just to fell a tree like that. Really, I don't know. It's just something I was going to raise by email, but I thought since you mentioned metal supports, I just wonder if they're the best.
Yes, Chair. Can I just clarify? Is that the huge tree on that's just up Leighton Road here?
Yes, I think so. I mean, yeah, I think so. I've got.
So the recommendation from the surveyor in terms of safety and preservation of the tree was we've either had new supports in there or they were adjusted in the lead up to Christmas, whatever the recommendation was. But if we are also saying that the canopy is too low, there's perhaps an extra bit of work that needs doing there. I don't know, but it's possible that might actually be an item, I'm going to take it away to look at, but it might be an item of work that's within this tender, because it takes a specialist company to be able to deal with those metal tree supports. There's not many that do that. So that's why they've been commissioned separately. And it might be that if there's a recommendation that the canopy is raised, that might be in here as well, but I'll take that away.
Okay, they're usually take away, that's great, thanks. Right. There are one or two minor textual possible changes. This is from memory, so correct me if I'm wrong. Page 45, paragraph 6. The grant may reject any tender not complying with any particular matter. I think matter there means manner.
I'll correct that, Chair.
Yeah. Also page 45, 10.1. Second line, be regarded confidential. Suggestion of putting after that. No, sorry, not after that. No, it's confidential by the contractor, except that's where it is that goes. Such information as may have been made up, and it may be in the public domain other than through the default of the tenderer.
Yes, Chair, I can do that.
Yeah, okay. Anyone disagrees? And then on page 48, everything comes by precedent. It isn't necessary here. In the table, you've got the totals for the items 1.1, 1.2, etc. Then we've got table 1 grand total. And then below that, you've got total cost of awarded for tender works. We don't need that total cost of awarded for tender works because that's for a situation where people can tender for individual items, but then give a discount if they get the whole job lot. That's not what's proposed here. There's one contract, you do the lot or you don't do any of it. Is that right?
I agree, Chair, and I will remove that bottom row from that.
And you, well, it's a minor thing, it's not a resolution, but you might like to consider whether you need a table 1 thing or not, because there's only one table. Important. Page 50. We've changed anticipate to expect. But just above that, it says on or before October. I think it would read better. It said on or before 1st October. I just been saying September, but. It's on October, suggests you can do it in October, which I don't think was meant. And then page 51, just above this date, the date and signatures. 2 says any agreement or agreement. It meant any agreement or arrangement, which balances the wording under 3B above.
I'll change that around. Thank you.
I don't think there's controversial. I'm not sure whether we need to. I know that goes in the resolution. And unless there are any further points, the resolution wants to approve. So the clarification of the. Any final comments? We've got the vote. In favour? Thank you very much. Thank you. Two memorial requests. Memorial requests, so listed on page 74. Would I just speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So there's a request for the committee to approve 3 requests for benches. 2 are memorial benches for specific people, whilst the other one is requested by the Human Milk Foundation, who also wish to donate a tree alongside their bench. Their requests have all been considered by the Green Spaces Development Officers, including the locations, and they support these applications.
Do we normally? Oh no, we have the information that was followed and the report is put up in the individual. Councillor? Yeah, commendable. Foundation, we've sponsored them, haven't we, in the recent past?
Yes.
Charity.
Yes.
Obviously got a good connection there. And it's Mr. Stevenson, I live in 104, 64 years, which is bad. Any comments? Anyone? Anything not tried?
No, nothing further to add, Chair. Thank you.
Shall we proceed to approve? Sure. We then completed the public business. And we move into exempt business, but I think I have to read my Kitty here. Right. I think this has to be quite formal, doesn't it?
Yes, Chair.
Then we have to vote to go.
That's fine. In view of the confidential nature of the following item, which relates to business matters of other individuals and organisations, the public and accredited representative of the press should be excluded while they are discussed. This is in accordance with the Public Bodies Admission to Meetings Act 1960 as amended by the Local Government Act 1972. Can we vote on that? In favour? Thank you very much. Do the recording, please.
Yes, Chair.